On the 16th episode of the Camp Owners Podcast, Howie and I sit down with Sol Birenbaum of Camp Walden and Rachel Kent of Girl Guides of Canada to talk about Camp 2021 as being a place of healing for both campers and staff and camp owners. We've done a really great job in our industry of talking about logistics of running camp in 2021, listening to those that did run and their success stories. But we want to shift the lens and the perspective a little bit and look at the emotional needs of our campers and staff and how camp can truly be a place of healing and what part we as camp owners have in that. Some really great takeaways for me and words that were used during this podcast were grief, healing, trauma, collective trauma, acknowledgement, duality. That was one of my favorite words about looking at duality of resilience with our campers and staff. So we hope you enjoy this episode as much as we enjoy the conversation as it was recorded.
Welcome to the Camp Owners Podcast, a space for camp owners to talk about the unique aspects of camp ownership and get inspired by each other. We are going to sit down with camp industry experts, leaders, and fellow camp owners to hear how the camp dream transpired for them, learn from them, and discuss some of the biggest issues in the private camp industry. Hi, everybody. My name is Howie Grossinger, and I am the co-owner of Camp Robin Hood, a day camp in the suburbs of Toronto.
And good morning. I am Kelly Shuna, co-owner and director of Hidden Pines Ranch Day Camp located in Stillwater, Minnesota. If you are looking to find and subscribe to our podcast so you get immediate release information, you can either find us online at gocamp.pro/ownerspod or by searching for us in your favorite podcast app. Finally, if you're listening to this and think it would be incredibly useful or just really interesting for other camp owners or aspiring camp owners in your circle, please feel free to send them a note to listen.
So Kelly, hello. We're here for another episode. Really excited about today's topic. Today, we are going to be joined by Rachel Kent from Girl Guides Canada, but also very excited, a fellow Go Camp Pro podcast host. She co-hosts Beyond Camp, and Sol Birenbaum, the director and co-owner of Camp Walden, and my business partner and dear friend. So we're really happy to have Sol with us. Definitely some Canadian content today, Kelly. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that as well. As we are early into 2021, everybody, and the work of camp owners continues tirelessly and optimistically for the upcoming summer, we thought we should have a discussion about what a return to camp will look and feel like for our campers, staff, and for ourselves, as so many of us had an unprecedented summer away from operating our camps, but also for camps that did run who will be welcoming campers and staff back after experiencing another 9 months of the pandemic after camp.
Wow, Howie, hello, nice to see you. Hello, my Canadian friends. I'll make sure to have my oh yeah and things like that from my Minnesota culture come out so we all feel very northern together. But it's so nice. I know Rachel from the show. I love listening to her. And Sol, it is a pleasure to meet you. I have heard so many great things from you about Howie. So I would love to have the two of you. Maybe Rachel, you go first. We always like to start by having you give us a little bit of your camp story, how this dream of working in camp transpired for you. Just a brief little intro for our guests that are listening. So Rachel, would you like to do that for us?
For sure. Thanks. I'm so happy to be here today. So I've been working in camp for just over 10 years. I've had the pleasure of working at private camps, association camps, and nonprofit camps, as well as outdoor ed centers. And it was always my dream to work full-time in camping. And it took a while to get there. I spent some years selling children's clothing while I worked like weekend event camps before I could get a full-time job. I always talk fondly about that there's some child out there dressed by my fashion advice while I was working on making my way into camp. And most recently, I was director of a Girl Guide camp here in Ontario before the pandemic occurred. And I've been involved in our provincial camping association for the last couple of years, which was probably one of the best moves that I've made for my camping career, especially during the pandemic where my career has taken a turn that I didn't expect.
Great. Thank you, Rachel, for sharing. And Sol, will you give us a little bit of your camp story dream for us?
Sure. It's wonderful to be spending this time with all of you. An avid listener of the show, really been enjoying it. Thank you, Howie and Kelly, for all the good work that you're doing. And good afternoon, Rachel. I've been attending camp since I was 4 years old. It started with the neighborhood day camp around the corner. And I quickly moved into the work of working at day camps and attending overnight camps as a camper. I thought I was going to be a doctor, and I was applying to med school and working in hospitals and studying for MCATs, but I just couldn't stay away. I tried this camp over here and that camp over there, and they just weren't the same as my childhood experiences. That wasn't until just a couple days before pre-camp was about to begin that I met Howie's father-in-law, and subsequently Howie and his amazing wife Sari, and fell in love with Camp Robin Hood, the day camp that Howie and his wife continue to own. And when I worked there, I just appreciated what opportunities for leadership there were there. And I rose through the ranks until one day, the option came forward for me to continue my application to become a doctor or to take on a full-time opportunity at Camp Robin Hood, which they were offering me. And we struck a deal over a handshake. We said maybe one day we could look for and find a perfect overnight camp that we could own together, that these day campers could grow into. And it was just an idea. And we shook hands on this idea and began our search. And we thought it might take 10 years. We thought it might never happen. But just a couple years after that, the founder of Camp Walden came to Howie and said, "I want you to buy my camp." And we did. And since that point, that's over 15 years ago, I've been the director and co-owner together with Howie and Sari and my wife Jen at Camp Walden, which just celebrated its 50th season in the summer of 2019. I must mention that not only did a lifelong pursuit and career emerge from all of this, but Howie also introduced me to the girl who later became the woman who became my wife and the mother of our 4 children. And so the rewards keep coming from this wonderful relationship and this lifelong pursuit.
I have a matchmaking service on the side, Kelly. I didn't know if you knew that was something that I do in addition to the Camp Pro stuff.
I didn't. Is this something that's eligible for our U.S. constituents, or is this just a Canadian perk, would you say?
Listen, this show has allowed me to grow my network. So I think my own children would say I'm too old for that process, but nonetheless, proud to that Sol and I share much of our professional and personal life together. So it's great, and it's great to have him on the show as well. So it's good. It's great.
I hope that by the end of the show, I can help your listeners learn a few things about Howie that they don't yet know. Don't worry, Howie, but just a couple of things along the way.
Hey, I'll take those insider tips. And you know what, Howie? Love knows no borders, at least pre-pandemic. But Zoom, love connection. I like it. Well, Sol and Rachel, thank you for sharing. And I'm really excited about this topic because I don't know if you have this experience, but many of the camp conversations that I feel are happening right now are very much about logistics. Okay, how are we going to group kids? How are we going to change programming? How are we going to do our sessions? Just logistics, temperature checks, questions, yada, yada, yada. But I haven't heard anyone, and maybe I'm just not listening to the appropriate avenues, but there hasn't been a lot of discussion that I've heard of about what will these campers be like and these staff when they come to me. And there's been some of that, but I think that this is a nice due diligence for that, to really think about what will our campers and staff be like emotionally? And also, what are we going to be bringing into camp this summer? But I'm really excited about this topic. I think it's something that really is a nice lens for us to put on and give some good discussion in that too. So getting into that, in what we'll do, and we'll kind of pivot back and forth, Rachel and Sol, but maybe we'll have Sol start this time, but will you talk to us a little bit about what you think will be the theme of summer 2021?
Sure. And like you, I've had that same reaction to the many fellow professionals that are very entrenched in the planning of logistics. And I don't knock it. And to be honest, I'm sure, like all of us, we have our nights where we wake up at 4 a.m. and think about, but how is it going to work? And I think that is a part of the larger picture that we're talking about today. I think I'm quite certain that the theme at our camp and perhaps at many, many camps for the summer of 2021 will be healing. Healing from the immense amount of grief that kids might be feeling or trauma that families may have experienced. And I think you had a few guests on the show earlier who I definitely agree with, who said part of our role is to be normal. Part of our role is to flip on the lights and be just as they remember. Surely we can be the place that's stable for in kids' lives. And I agree. And I'm going to say, and not necessarily to disagree, but to add to that, it's also okay for us to really get at the heart of what we provide and for us to be vulnerable and for us to be hurt by everything we've experienced together and to provide for kids a summer that is reflective of the experiences we've all been through over the last year. And this is related to the pandemic, but this is also related to the challenging of authority in the Capitol last night. And this is related to everything we've learned from the Black Lives Matters movement, pardon me. And we've been through a lot. And it just got me thinking as Howie and I had a chance to spend a summer at our camp empty, how sad that was at times, but how wonderful and restorative it was at times as well. And I just got to thinking, maybe there's something that I can take from my healing that I can apply to the healing of kids. And that's really been the center of my thinking since I was on my back in the lake looking up at the sun in the middle of August. How will this translate to kids' experiences next summer? So that's sort of my overall response to what I think the theme will be.
Rachel, I'm curious, with some of the topics you've been addressing in your own podcast, related to mental health and the impact that the pandemic has had on youth, how much of what Sol has shared resonates with sort of where your thoughts are as a camp pro and some of the things that, you're currently thinking related to sort of, a thematic approach to dealing with and supporting what campers and staff will be bringing to camps in 2021.
Yeah, so much of what you said, Saul, resonates with me. As you were speaking, I was just like nodding along. I was like, yeah, this all makes total sense. I think when I think of a theme, I think of building resilience. And I say building because we're going to have to teach our campers and our staff how to go through this. Nobody's ever gone through this before. There's lots of great infographics on Instagram and now about how to take care of yourself, but we're all learning this together. None of us know how to cope with this, and we have to teach each other how. We have to walk through that together. I think of a story when my friends told me that her daughter now, when they go out walking on the street, knows it's important to keep distance. So when she sees somebody 30 feet in the distance, she steps off the sidewalk and is like, we have to keep distance. And her mom's like, that's really awkward because they're still 30 feet down the sidewalk and it's fine. But her daughter is just so used to not being around people and not having people close to her. We're experiencing this collective trauma. So it's wonderful that camp can be the same place. And in many ways, we want that. That will be really healing and really powerful. But we also need to acknowledge that we've gone through this collective trauma. We're still living it. And so we have to teach kids how to work through that and how to recover from that. And so what Saul said about being vulnerable about our own struggles with our staff is also really, really important. That having a summer at camp will be wonderful and so healing, but it's also not going to necessarily fix everything, and that's okay.
I wrote down some words that stuck out to me. I wrote down healing, obviously, vulnerable, raw, resilience, collective trauma, acknowledge. I like that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think for me, unpacking this a little more in this discussion is going to be really helpful to get sort of where you're at on a variety of sort of what I would call silos, communication avenues we may have in addressing or how open we will be about addressing these issues, whether it be rebuilding resilience and the camp is a restorative place in many ways. But I also think about approaches that camp owners, camp pros should be taking in terms of the approach to parents. How much should camp operators be willing to be very upfront about, not only are we going to do archery and we're going to work towards our badge at X activity and we're going to get back to building on those skills and those experiences, but how much should camp pros be communicating this other side that is on our mind that we're going to be intentional about? And I think about how we're going to support staff in our training, and what are we doing to make them aware that this will be a role you will need to play. It won't just be about following the daily schedule and getting to the dining hall on time or things of that kind. It'll be what we know staff are capable of in terms of being caring and showing concern, but to what extent are we addressing this other theme at camp that we want, and ultimately campers, and how willing are we to actually address these topics with our campers on day one, in their bunks, in quiet time. So I'm curious from each of you, as I've sort of set the table for what we can do. I know Kelly and I would like to get your thoughts about any and all of those topics, however you want to start. Sol, perhaps you could kick it off.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking that the last thing I wanted to hear when I was grieving the loss of my mom was that I was in grief. To be told that I was grieving, that I would explain to people after my mom passed away just over a year ago that I was having trouble sleeping through the night. Maybe I ate something wrong. Well, that's grief, someone would say. No, it's not grief. My mom lived a beautiful life and she had a brave and courageous end to her life. I'm not grieving. I'm managing my feelings just fine. So I imagine it will be tough for us to explain to our communities this idea of assisting their kids through grief if some families don't acknowledge that, or aren't ready to acknowledge that they are in fact having those feelings. And that's why I think, we can get vulnerable in this podcast, right? The kids aren't listening and the parents aren't listening, just the many, many amazing camp owners across North America. And I think we can get vulnerable with each other as a rehearsal for getting vulnerable with our families and speaking about our own experiences with trauma and grief. And I think that will open the door for them to perhaps see this in themselves and to see this in the experience that we are providing.
I think it's something that we really have to role model for our communities as well. And we don't need to say this is how you're feeling, because maybe they're not feeling that. Maybe, all of our experiences are different. They say we're in the same storm, but different boat. So I think giving kids and our staff the language to talk about it is really important. Like, here's some ways some people may be feeling. You might identify with some of these feelings. Thinking about them as like Velcro labels that you can like take on and off, I think would be really helpful when you're doing staff training and talking about like what your campers and families might be processing, or what our staff might even be processing, to allow them to talk about that. Because when I think about what our campers and staff might be going through, we've talked a lot about anxiety in recent years when we train our staff, but I think anxiety and social anxiety are only going to be heightened now with all that we've gone through. Be careful, be cautious, like just everything in society is heightening our levels of anxiety. And I think that's going to be a huge thing that we have to talk through. And I think that role modeling that is just going to be so key, that we start that at the top. The camp owners are modeling that for their full-time staff, and that's being rolled out to the younger staff and the part-time staff, and then to the campers.
Yeah,
I totally agree with that, Rachel. It's sort of this duality of the kids are resilient. The kids, we've raised them well. And I mentioned I have 4 kids. They're all at this overnight camp age right now, and day camp age. And I see that they've responded to the elements of the pandemic and the requirements of the pandemic far more resiliently than I would have guessed. Having said that, I also see that they're hurting. And I worry about the long-term effects of socializing with friends for hours and hours a day and never being able to touch in any way, to hug, to hold hands, to piggyback, to bump into each other, just as an example. And I know all your listeners are thinking this, but it's this duality of the kids are doing well, and they're hurting all at the same time. And I think that's going to translate in the summertime to celebration. I imagine when I say welcome to camp, as I said, when I say, not if I say, when I say welcome to camp, I think there's going to be roaring laughter and applause. But I won't be surprised if later that same day there's inexplicable tears, that there are kids and staff feeling just an overwhelming sense of something they can't explain. And I think it's going to be a summer of duality. I don't want to make it sound like I think the summer is going to be like a house of mourning. I just think like the stages of grief, which I've come to learn are not this linear check off the list process, but rather these things that visit once in a while unexpectedly. I think we should ready ourselves for those to enter the communal space far more than ever before.
I often say on the Beyond Camp podcast that it's a roller coaster, that I've just experienced a roller coaster of emotions over the last, year, let's say. Feels like it's been almost a year now, maybe 9 months. And I think that that's going to be what it's like. It's going to be a roller coaster. And so I think for different age groups of campers and staff, we can start to give them metaphors and words to acknowledge what that is. Like, yes, you're going to feel incredible at moments, and at moments it's going to be so hard and you're not going to understand. And like, that's okay. You can be both resilient and grieving or experiencing trauma, and you're not weak for feeling any of those things. And for parents, like, it's not a failing on your part if your child is grieving or having a really hard time, because we haven't done this before. Like, we're learning together, and kids are resilient. I agree. Like, they're going to get through this. We're all going to get through this. Camp is going to be a huge part of getting through this. And it's okay that we all learn together.
You're mentioning the word words is something I've been thinking about a lot. I've been doing, I think it's so important to put a language on what it is that we're feeling so that we can process it, integrate it, understand it. I did two things over the last 6 or 7 months that I sort of been reflecting on. One is when my mom passed away in November of 2019, I locked myself in a room and wrote a eulogy that I'm very proud of, and I hope Howie will tell you that I'm modest about most things, but I wrote a great eulogy. And it was this amazing thing that the funeral home records everything, and even before the pandemic, and then sends a copy of the recording afterwards. I didn't know they did that, but they did. And I found myself listening to the recording. I've listened to it a dozen times. Here's something else I've been doing since the summer. I've been reading and rereading the letters we wrote to our families. I just find myself connected to the words. The letters that were written at a time of great anxiety and great stress and great when uncertainty, and I just find myself reading those words over and over again. The words are helping me understand it. So I totally agree with that. And then there's sort of the flip side of that, which is the stuff that you can't put words on, those feelings and wanting to distract yourself and numb, because just as much as I've been facing my grief or my healing very, very overtly, so too must I admit that I'm watching every show on Netflix. Howie says, did you watch the latest show? And I've seen all the shows. So numbing and distracting is also a healthy part in good doses of this process. So once again, translating that into the summer, I imagine we will be helping kids, as you say, finding words for these things that are seemingly inexplicable at the time, but also getting to archery and just distracting ourselves from the constant barrage of negative news. I think the quiet of camp, day and overnight camps, the quiet that we can provide is one of the greatest gifts that we are going to give kids this summer. And I mean that in every sense of the word. I don't just mean in terms of the decibel level. I mean just the ability to listen to one conversation, just the ability to be able to ignore, if only for the day, what's going on in the outside world. I think this is a chance for the world to really understand what the special thing is that camp provides. And if I were to highlight one element of that, it's that serenity and quiet from everything that's going on.
I like duality. That's huge. And I think that's how everyone will feel. This is so great to be here. This is so different. This is I just think duality is huge. And it reminds me of during the Women in Camp Summit, Dr. G was the keynote, welcoming keynote. And she was talking about kids and resilience. And she had said, which I never thought about before, the ability for kids to feel both excited and scared, or sad and happy at the same time, is a sign of resilience. And that to me was huge. So just the fact that your kids are, and they may be, and that's okay too, that's something to be acknowledging, but that they're not just sad or they're not just fearful, that they're both fearful and excited is a sign of resilience. So that to me, I think is a huge message that we can give to parents about that. And I thought that was really powerful for me to hear in thinking about kids.
And I think that our staff will feel very similar. I think they're going to have that duality as well in terms of what they've experienced, the distance learning they've done in school and high school and college and university, will bring them back to our locations, whether they be day camp or overnight camp, with a different perspective on the world that they've lived through for over a year. And, for me, I think that, the attention and the, that we must give to acknowledging that it's going to be very different for our staff as well will be important. One of the other things that, comes to mind is the fact that, and thank goodness for so many camps that were able to run in 2020, and hats off to everybody. And there was such a feeling of accomplishment, I am sure, for those staff and campers who thought that they got over the hurdle, and they did, to actually attend and experience camp, and the emotions they went through from such a short period of time of whatever they experienced to getting into camp and whatever that looked like. They now left camp, went into a long period of time where in many ways things didn't change and often got worse, and now have to come back. So those camps, I am sure, and I know for those of us on the call who didn't operate camps, I think for those who are listening who ran camps, the consideration for those campers and staff who were with them in 2020, went through this long period, and then now come back, I think they're, given the topics we're dealing with, they are not what I would say out of the woods from dealing with, maybe even more intensely, because they've had that experience, what we're all talking about. So I think that all of us, are going to, as we started with, we'll have to give as much attention to our water stations we're creating and our scheduling and our arrival procedures as we will to this issue of being very open about the feelings that everyone's bringing to camp every day or for a period of time in an overnight camp setting. So just really, really good stuff being shared today. So thank you for this so far.
I wanted to go back, if we could, to Rachel mentioning naming. That reminds me a lot of Brene Brown's FFTs. I won't say an expletive on here, but it's basically effing first times. And part of the step of dealing with first times, which this will be a first time, like how we said, whether you had campers last summer or not, the campers will look different than they did last summer, regardless, because it has been extended, what we've been going through. But part of her theory is when you go through something for a first time, naming it is huge. It's a part of that process. And Rachel talked a lot about that. And I'm sure all of you, when we're working with campers, especially the youngest, it looks like you might be mad, or tell me more about what you're feeling, helping them to name that. And Rachel brought up something that I loved, which was the Velcro label idea during staff training. And I love your language, Rachel. You're so good with language. I don't know if anyone's ever told you that, but you're really, really articulate with language. It's one of your gifts. But you had said, there's many things that people could be feeling, and here are some of them. So right away, you're like, here's a couple of things you could be feeling, and maybe there's some that we haven't identified. But I love this idea of having a bunch of labels, and we Velcro them up about how people are feeling. And you had mentioned using that with staff. So I wanted to talk a little bit now about what's your thoughts, and maybe Rachel, you can go first and then Sol, but what's your thoughts on staff training? What will you do differently? Like a Velcro label potentially. What will you do differently this year if you were to run a staff training? What you think would be important things for camp owners to consider as part of that?
I think a big part is considering that your staff and your campers aren't all coming to camp with the same experience. I think that's really, really important. That not everybody experienced distance learning. Not everybody experienced being able to have groceries delivered and having, both parents working from home. Like, the experience was very different for different people. And that really needs to be acknowledged, that you're going to have people who went to school all the time because the parents needed childcare. You're going to have people who lost folks to COVID, and you're going to have to deal with that as well. So you're going to have to do a lot of sessions around that, training around that. And I think, as Saul spoke about grief, I think you're actually going to have to talk about that. Like, when you have training sessions on difficult conversations, some of those difficult conversations are going to have to be around dealing with the loss of loved ones, because that's a common thing that's happened now, unfortunately, and it breaks my heart to have to say that. Other difficult conversations when you talk about bullying are going to be, if somebody starts to cough or doesn't feel good, how do you cope with that at camp? Because that's going to send potentially ripples of fear through your community. When a kid is like, oh, I have a stomach ache because they're, missing home, or they're just like generally anxious. In the past, that might have been not a big deal, but how do you cope with that now? That's really going to change your lens of staff training. And I'm not saying that you should always be looking at everything through a lens of fear, because I don't think that that's true. But I think that you're going to need to be upfront about these things, and not sweeping them under the rug.
I 100% agree with everything that Rachel has just said, and I'll admit to the group that I've tried to do as little thought about the specifics of what staff training will look like, and to stay focused. I've been sort of saying, at least through 2020, now that it's the new year, it's time for me to shift my mindset a little bit. But through 2020, I tried to sort of practice a discipline of focusing on the bigger picture. And I'm in the 15 years of doing this, I've learned the same lesson over and over again, which is the more the staff can experience the Walden way, the Walden experience of their own, the more we leave with a positive outcome for both kids and staff. The more staff can experience camp, the better. And what is the heart of what our camp experience is? And I suppose that this will be true for many of the listeners. Like, I find myself just wiping away things that don't really matter. They don't really relate to the mission. We take these nice field trips every year, but if we can't we're not going to take field trips this year. They're not on mission. The three things that are on mission for us is, number one, building positive relationships. We promise one thing to our families. Well, two things. One is that we're going to take care of their kids, and the second is that we're going to help them make friends for life. And so that's, if we can make that true for our staff, if we can begin that process in the first few days of pre-camp, then I think we're optimizing the likelihood of positive outcome over the long term. And what might that look like? Just brainstorming now, it might mean that we're not sitting in rows, and we're not focused on attention at the front as much as we might be in other years. We're focused on our groups, our cohort groups, our cabin groups, our friendship groups. And that might sound obvious, but just it's helpful just for me to hear myself say that it's okay. I'm going to be giving myself permission to spend a lot of time, I'm going to put air quotes around this, wasting time sitting in a circle and just hanging out. I think setting the stage for the building of positive relationships, lifelong friendships, is one of the best things we can do for our staff at the beginning of staff training. Number two, embracing the natural elements of the outdoors. Walden wouldn't be exactly the same if we rented a mall and held it there. It would be great, but it wouldn't be on mission. Part of our mission is to experience these friendships in our beautiful setting, our natural outdoors. And the elements, the natural elements, were such a huge part of my own healing this summer. I mentioned just the daily swim in the lake, the walks along the paths, the seeing of sunsets through the eyes of a camper. Howie, we talked about this over the summer a lot. We've seen these sunsets 1,000 times, but for the first time I saw them through the eyes of a camper. We were a camper of our two families in two different socially distanced homes this summer, and we got to really experience it, and that helped me appreciate the healing power. So I'm going to make sure that the staff are quickly exposed to the natural elements. That might mean, air quote, wasting time taking hikes in those first couple of days. And the third thing that I will focus on during staff training and then for the kids is ritual and routine, which are similar words and not exactly the same word. You mentioned distance learning, and I've got the 4 kids at home now on Google Classroom, and Howie and I have to talk. We enjoy talking, almost on a daily basis. And sometimes I'm looking in that little FaceTime window, and I'm in my robe, and my chest hair is sticking out, and it's a visual reminder that I haven't taken my shower and driven the kids to school, and I'm working, but it's already 11:30 in the morning, and I'm still in the bathrobe. What's going on? We've all had our routines turned upside down, and daily rituals, which could be personal or group oriented, daily routines, I think provides that message to kids that there is order, there is stability, there is comfort, someone is taking care of me. And it doesn't mean we won't give sleep-ins, and it doesn't mean we won't break the rules, and it doesn't mean that we won't adapt as we go. But for there to be a fundamental template right from the get-go, I think will be important in staff training as well.
Well, to our listeners and our panel, you now are recognizing all the feels that Sol Birenbaum provides in my professional and personal life. So there you go. But Sol, you do definitely have a way of sort of capturing sort of the essence of things that some of us are probably thinking about, but you have a really great way of sort of honing in on the description of what it is we're doing. And I've always, and do appreciate that. And I know our listeners do as well. I think that I find myself at this time of year, and I have the good fortune of working with a really core group of young, capable leaders at our camp, envisioning what a day at camp will look like at our day camp in 2021. And I love that they're drilling down into, the detail of, what does the schedule look like and all that stuff. But I am mindful, similar to what Sol has just described, that while we need to give attention to all of those things to ensure safe and secure experiences, and that we are living up to whatever local public health authorities are saying, you must do this at this time, that we have to give ourselves permission during training and through the day of camp to slow things down and find the right balance between, let's call it, the adherence to the very necessary, mandatory, important rules to make camp safe and have our families feel comfortable and confident, but also these other things. And I think it's almost they're working in concert together. And I think for me, I'm trying very hard to strike the balance between not sending a message that one is more important than the other, but they equally play a role into everyone who experiences our camp in 2021 to walk away with, whoa, this checked off all the boxes. So I think that for me, as Kelly, you definitely appropriately said, the beauty of this topic for us at this time of the year is we have been, and this is the wrong word to use, but we've been preoccupied or bogged down with checking, has the health department given us new guidance? And what does arrival at day camp look like? And do we have to do temperature checks? And what does days off for our staff look like? And can we give them to them? And we have to do that. But I'm really, really excited about the takeaways for, me personally and the audience on this topic. So I think those are important things to keep in mind.
Well, our typical, then you go, Rachel. I was just going to say, I think many of us have been trained to comfort, care, show compassion for kids in many physical signs or arm around the shoulder or getting close and crouching down to them. Kids will come in and sit right close to you. It's those physical things. But I don't know that we're as well versed, especially in training our staff, about how to give that verbally, or with different types of body language that aren't in as close proximity. So I think it will be that retraining of here's how we can show compassion and care or acknowledgement of feelings verbally or by listening in different ways than we have been able to before, to comfort kids or to show that we hear them, that we care about them. So I think that will be, like you said, Howie, it will be a different lens and a different way that we'll have to pivot. I don't like that word recently, but we'll have to pivot a little bit and shift, and it will be good for us, but it will be different for camp professionals, I think. Rachel, go ahead with what you were going to say.
Yeah, I think, we talked about big picture things, and a lot of camp owners are still thinking big picture, but think of the key rituals that make your camp and really focus on those as well. What I found myself missing last summer was there was no end of summer campfire that I have with my staff. So now, has the summer ended? I don't know. It's still quite warm out here. So how do I know? Because I never went to camp. I haven't left camp. I haven't gone through those things. So picking some of those key rituals is going to be really grounding for your staff to be okay, I'm back home now. We're doing our opening campfire, or we're whatever that tradition might be. I think keeping some of those rituals, and that will also give you some excitement as you're looking forward to planning as well. Maybe it isn't time to look at all those little daily rituals yet, but pick those couple of key big things that you can do. And then Kelly, to your point about language and body language and things, we've all learned to communicate over Zoom in the last 9 months. We've had to change our style of communication, body language, et cetera. And we've learned to pick up on those cues. So we're going to be able to do that again. But we just have to think of it through that lens of, okay, how do we show this? How do we demonstrate this? And staff will get creative. What's your camp's way of giving a high five, since we can't give a high five now? Maybe you come up with a silly dance around that or something. Having staff be really bought into those rituals will be really helpful.
I also think that, we can't lose sight of the fact that for those of us who are camp directors, the year off for many of us didn't allow us to do what we love to do best. And I think that being mindful of what you love most about what you do in the day-to-day, you need to start thinking about, what is it that perhaps you realistically can't do anymore that you typically do in terms of your interactions with your campers, your staff, the way you deliver certain aspects of your program. And then, I think for myself and listen, just like Kelly, getting emotional, on a dime kind of stuff. What is the first time I get to have my staff in front of me after a year off? I start to think about, thinking about those moments of, the role that I play in the lives of my campers and staff. And some camp directors who are listening have a lot of people who are on the mic and do their thing in front of the kids on the stage, et cetera. I happen to be someone who has a very, personal relationship with my camp community. Will I still get to do flagpole the way that I've always loved to do it? Will I have staff training where I'm going to have to talk to, smaller groups at a time? And what does that look like and feel like? So I think that as much as we are thinking about communicating themes to parents, campers, staff, and how we're doing that, I also would like and encourage all of us to give time for ourselves, for those of us who are immersing ourselves in what for many of us was a summer off on what we really want to get back to and how we do that and how do we take care of ourselves to do that. That brings us the kind of joy that it always has. So that I've been thinking about that recently.
Yeah. Howie's a really big hugger, and so are many of us in the industry. There's something you may or may not know already about Howie. Comes from a long line of huggers. His father kisses me on the lips every time I see him. It's a wonderful moment, and that could be true about many camp directors across North America. I think we're very focused right now on getting camps open and what open camps look like. But I think we have other, I don't like to use all this war terminology, but we have other battles in our future. Like I've mentioned the importance of touch and I think again on a Camp Owners podcast, we can just be real about the fact that human touch, interaction, hugs, arm over the shoulder, teenagers flirting in age-appropriate ways, the first kiss. These are, at our camp, fundamental aspects of the experience. And I know that the dream of a summer where kids can be free to do what they've always done is pretty much gone, but that doesn't mean it has to be zero. And when we've won the fight, if depending on the degree of battle you're in your various states and provinces, when we've won the fight of opening camps, I think we should turn our attention to preserving healthy elements of touch. I agree with everything Rachel said. If we have to, we'll learn to communicate otherwise, but I don't want to have to. I know we're going to have to a large extent, and 2 cohorts and things and so on. We got to be ready for that, and we'll be ready. We'll all be ready. But I'm not ready to imagine a homesick camper not getting the hug that they need from the person they need it from. That's number one. Number two is music. And music is an important part of many camp cultures. It's particularly important in our camp culture. The founder of Walden was an avid folk musician, and I've been able to pass the music on and carry the torch. My mom was a piano teacher and choral conductor, and so music is very much part of the DNA of our camp. I imagine the arts are part of, in some way, every summer camp experience. And there too is something I think worth fighting for. Again, I'm not talking about forming choirs in 8-by-8-foot rooms and singing droplets into each other's mouths. But if you tell me that I have to agree now to the fact that we're not going to sing a tune this summer, in the middle of January, that's going to be very hard for me to accept just yet. I want to fight for that one. There needs to be music at our camp this summer. So I'm just sort of broadcasting where my head is at, which is we got to be ready, but also we have to be clear on what's important, but what's more important. And touch and music for me are at the top of those lists.
Those are, I think, topics that a lot of us think about in terms of, the vision we have of the camp experience we provide. And I think, gives a lot of food for thought, for people and in their planning for sure. Kelly, I know that, from a day camp perspective, is there anything in this conversation so far that sort of has you thinking around the day camp experience in any particular way, from some of these topics in terms of the way you'd approach sort of the ramping up of camp?
Well, after Sol mentioned that, I was really thinking about how am I going to don the usual mustache that I have at least once a week at camp. There's a little boy that likes to draw a mustache on my face at least once a week. And then I typically Fridays for a dress up theme, figure out how I can combine a mustache into that costume. So then I was thinking, how am I going to mustache on my mask? So I got a little side-railed from that, Sol. But besides the mustache debacle I might be in, I've been thinking a lot, we drastically changed our sessions this summer from every other day to kids need to be there 5 days a week. And consistency was a big part of that. And when we did that change, I was thinking, like many camp owners, about the consistency of group size and not mixing pods. But Saul brings up the point too about just the consistency and that feeling for kids, because I know my kids don't have that. And I think that is something that kids and staff could use. And that's a really common theme in a residential camp, that they come for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 8 weeks. But it's not always the case in day camps, because we want to be flexible as we can be for those families and choose us. But I think that what Saul had mentioned about consistency is huge. And I want to be a consistent thing for kids and staff in a non-consistent world at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that, day camps have an opportunity to look like, to look at that, the daily return to the same pod, the staff. Those interactions will be really important, and the implications for both day and overnight are so interesting, and but in many ways, just thematically, just very similar, and the distinction doesn't have to be there. That's really, really some really good things to think about. In terms of any last thoughts before we move on to our last part of our episode, Rachel and Saul. We've touched on a lot of great stuff today. I really appreciate all the great insight. Rachel, knowing the work you're doing with Girl Guides in the role that you now have, and obviously the topics that you're addressing on your great podcast, is there anything that sort of resonated in this discussion, or something you'd like to add that we haven't addressed that you'd like the listeners to just, think about or contemplate?
Yeah, I think as we head into a summer that still has so much unknown, it's important that camp owners, camp pros, camp directors are taking care of themselves in order for them to take care of others. And, we say that a lot, right? Like, you can't pour from an empty cup, but that is still so, so true. And as we head into the summer, a lot of us often head into the summer almost burnt out. We didn't get to fill our cup last year with camp in the way that we often would. We need to take care of ourselves so that we can take care of our communities. And in the next couple of months, we need to really prioritize that.
Yeah. Saul, your thoughts on that?
I want to echo and build on that idea. I've been thinking a lot about that, and how you mentioned that earlier in the week to me, just about like the importance of staying active and getting strong now, because we're going to need it later. And there's this image of the fall leaves at Walden that I also think a lot about. How leaves, they are not dormant in the winter, they are getting strong so that they're collecting nutrients so that they can blossom in spring and then stand up to the stresses of summer and fall and repeat again. So the answers are in nature, and I really think that it may feel like many of us are dormant now, but we're not. We're quietly. My advice to myself is to spend this time quietly getting strong, and that involves exactly what Rachel just mentioned, a process of healing oneself, because we're going to need it later. And I'll just summarize that with one sentence and say, it's okay to not be okay now, camp directors. Like, this is awful. This is awful. And we've all experienced this in different ways. Some of us, God forbid, have lost people related to because of COVID. I mentioned I lost my mom. She lived a ripe old age. People lose people in their lives. This happens, but it's okay, I've learned, for me to have my own grief and to just say, you know what, that's mine, and it hurts and it sucks. And we've all been through something that really, really sucks. And if you're feeling not okay right now, you're not alone, and that's okay. There's lots of people in our industry reaching out on Go Camp Pro and throughout and all your guests on the podcast that are willing to help. I'm spending this time getting strong because our community is going to need us come summer.
Mm-hmm. I was listening to Dax Shepard. I talk about Brene Brown a lot, but that's actually one of my therapies. It's one of my therapies for myself, is I'll go on a walk and listen to one of her podcasts, and it's almost like an extra therapy visit that I didn't pay for. But I was listening to her podcast with Dax Shepard and Tim Ferriss, and something that Dax Shepard talked about that reminded me of what you said, Saul and Rachel, about the self-care. is he was an addict for a really long time, and he now is a sponsor. And something that he says to those he sponsors when they're really worked up about something, and I get really worked up, Howie knows this probably about me now. I get really, all the passion, I just get worked up in good and bad ways. But when that passion is sometimes it's anxiety about what's happening, or I'm concerned, he says he tells those he's sponsoring, I want you to go move your body for 30 or 45 minutes. And then I want you to call me back. Or I want you to go move your body or do something. And then I want you to call me back. And he says almost every time that those emotions and those feelings are far less intense when those people call him back, only because they moved their bodies and got some of that out. So I think that that's an important message, and something I might ask my husband and Howie or anybody, just when I'm worked up, to say, hey, Cal, go move your body. And then you call me back and then let's chat about this. But that to me was really, it's so simple, but it was just really profound about a nice self-care thing. And I can see myself using that for staff this summer. Hey, why don't you go take a walk to the mailbox, or go take this trash out, and then let's reconvene. Or, having them do something physical, and even campers, hey, why don't you, let's take a little walk and talk and then come back to me. So that just resonated after you said that might be a nice little strategy that I will try to implore this summer. All right, Howie, should we move to our inspiration time? So if you're new to our show, we always end in a particular way with something that's inspiring us right now. This can be a book, article, podcast, documentary, leadership quote, or anything else that's inspiring us to be better camp professionals. So we ask our guests to share, and then Howie and I will always share. Sol, we have you slated first. Would you like me to start and be a good role model, or do you feel ready to lead us with this charge?
I'm ready to dive in.
Okay.
So like some of your other guests, it's hard to come up with just one. I know that Howie, I checked in with Howie last night. He'd already mentioned a book that was very helpful to me called The Choice by Dr. Edith Eger. And for those who are managing feelings of grief, The Wild Edge of Sorrow was another book that I read, which was very helpful. And I think that when I'm talking about inspirations, we got to mention our wives, Howie, Sari and Jen have been extreme. I mean, we couldn't form these ideas without the wonderful support and encouragement and new insights that each of them bring to us. And Kelly, you mentioned the importance of movement. That's something that Jen has inspired the three of us about many times. But keeping it simple is what I just keep telling myself. What's really been inspirational for me is the lyrics to various songs, and various different songs have saved me through different parts of the pandemic. And there's a wonderful staff member at Walden who is always recommending me just the song that he knows I need to hear. And this one is Tom Petty. And it's called Wildflowers, and the chorus simply goes like this. You belong among the wildflowers. You belong in a boat out at sea. Sail away, kill off all the hours. You belong somewhere you feel free. I mean, if there was ever a chorus written about camp, that's the one. And, we're not in the same room. There's no droplets. So I thought just had to sing. How?
Welcome to my life, listeners.
Oh, you said you were going to make me get verklempt, and I got misty eyes and I got the goosebumps. Oh, I love that.
And Tom Petty does a much better job than me, but it's a wonderful song.
Nope. That was, I think, our first actual song on the podcast. So mark that down. That was beautiful. Oh, I had all the feels. So thank you. I love it. All right, Rachel, no pressure to sing. You just be you, girl, and you do what you want to do for that inspiration.
Yeah, wow, that's a hard act to follow. Well, I'm not going to sing for you because nobody wants that. But I have recently gotten onto James Clear's Thursday newsletter, and it's a 3-2-1 newsletter, and it comes with 3 ideas, 2 quotes, and 1 question. And it's the exact right amount of information that my brain can process these days. And so it's not always relevant to me, but there's always something that I can take from it, and I love that.
Will you say that for me one more time so I can make sure the listeners got it, and I'll put in the show notes?
Yeah, it's James Clear, his 3-2-1 newsletter.
Okay, awesome. All right, looks like I'm next in the lineup. So I'm going to go a little rogue here on my inspiration, but I would like to share that what's inspiring me is I just got done watching the show Ted Lasso with my husband. And everyone had said, "Oh, watch it. It's so funny. It's so funny." So I came into it like, "Oh, this should just be fun and light." But it struck a chord in me. Like it stamped on my heart. And I didn't expect that. It was funny and Midwestern humor, which I am right there with you. But it also was this like feel good. I felt like it was what we need in this pandemic, this optimism and just kind of representing the good that's there. It might be a little deeper for different people at different times and for all of us, but man, it made me feel really good. And it just struck deep in there. And there was a quote during a particular episode, and please watch it if you haven't, but he is being challenged to darts. And something he brings up is a quote by Walt Whitman. And it is simply be curious, not judgmental. And that when we are curious and ask questions, that judgment, just kind of like those feelings when you go for a walk, will dissipate. And it's just such a different thing. Instead of judging, let's be curious and ask questions. A very Michael Brandwein too. But that really has been inspiring me and something that I really wanted to share and will become a quote that I think I'm going to put up in my office.
That's really, I'm in the middle of that show. So I do agree. I love that show. For me, I'm going to do a little bit of a departure for regular listeners. In recent episodes, I've shared a book that has been inspiring me. Today, I think that on sort of related to the theme we've been discussing all show, I was at a point near the end of 2020 where I just needed a boost. I needed, something to bridge 2020 to 21. And for me, it was my town hall that I had with my staff that didn't get a chance to work with us in 2020. I convened an information session. I had almost 100 staff on a Zoom call, and just the exercise of providing details and, sharing what may be realistic, what is realistic, and what is optimistic about the summer of 2021 really served as inspiration for me, particularly, with the emails I received from staff afterwards who really appreciated being on and stuff. So I think for me, it was what I needed going into 2021 and gets me excited about, reconnecting with my staff and, starting to just, have the kind of conversations that put us in the frame of mind as camp owners to really, hit the ground running on this journey towards summer 2021. So that's where I'm at, a little different than the book recommendations, but that's what's inspiring me these days. As we finish this great discussion, we always ask our guests to just share with our audience where people might get a hold of you. And, if they wanted to reach out, ask you some questions, continue the conversation. Sol, how can people in the camp world get a hold of you?
Sure. The best way is over email, SOL, that's Sol, short for Solomon, at campwalden.ca. But I'm also on social, usually under the handle Walden Sol.
Amazing. Thank you. And Rachel, how can people get a hold of you?
Folks are always welcome to send me an email at kentr@girlguides.ca.
And Kelly?
The best email for me is Kelly with a Y at hiddenpinesranch.com.
Amazing. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Sol and Rachel, it's been a really important discussion, and I really enjoyed hearing your insight and the openness that you brought to this really important topic. And I really do hope that our listeners, and I know that they will benefit from this. Kelly, thanks to you once again. Really, really, really great discussion. I want to just remind everyone, please don't forget that you can find all of our show notes at gocamp.pro/ownerspod. You can find the resources that we mentioned in this episode and lots of good stuff from our show and other Go Camp Pro podcasts, including Beyond Camp, which we're happy to plug as our crossover episode. They're all out there and they're amazing. We really hope you enjoyed this discussion, this episode. Thanks for listening, everyone. And we can't wait to join you again on the Camp Owners Podcast.